Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London again with another watch review, and today we're looking at the Montblanc 4810 Twinfly. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time and look at the history behind the watch. So if we go back to 1996 when Montblanc was incorporated by two Germans, and they became quickly quite famous for very high-end luxury pens, or handcrafted pens. And then over the years, they expanded to other areas of the luxury market, things like cufflinks, leather goods, wallets, blah, 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 blah. In the 90s, Montblanc decided they wanted to look into making watches. Doing watches wasn't too different for them to what they were doing already. So in 1997, they released their first watch. If we skip 9 years on to 2006, which marks Montblanc's 100-year anniversary, Montblanc released a collection of watches called the 410, and 410 comes from the Montblanc, the actual mountain Montblanc, being 110 meters at its highest peak. And then if we skip another 10 years on to 2016, which marks Montblanc's 110-year anniversary, they released the 410 Twinfly and a few other watches, but the Twinfly is what we're looking at today. So the 4810 Twinfly is limited to 1,110 pieces, obviously from 110-year anniversary. So let's have a look at some of the features now. Let's start from the clasp. So the clasp is a twin deployment clasp. It feels a little bit cheap and flimsy if I'm being really honest. It doesn't have the same quality that something like maybe a Tag or Omega has, and this is slightly more expensive than those watches. It feels very thin and light. It doesn't have that solid feel that some other brands do. I do really like twin deployment clasps. They're really easy to use, those twin triggers, but this one is not the highest quality I have seen. It also is quite sharp on the edges, unlike other brands that round the edges out so it's a little bit more comfortable. I can imagine this may be leaving an imprint on your wrist due to those sharper edges. The strap is just a standard leather strap, nothing special. Then we move on to the case. It has a 43mm case diameter, so it's quite a big case. It's quite a big watch in general, and the depth is very, very deep. So if you were to wear this with a suit or a dress cuff or a shirt, I can imagine it getting stuck on the edge and not really slipping under as it should do, because it is basically a dress watch, this watch, even though it's got sports features like a chronograph. And so for that reason, I think it might be a little irritating if you were wearing this with a suit or a smart look. The case is made from steel. And if we start from the case back and then work our way up to the dial, we'll do it that way. So the case back is a clear sapphire crystal case back, so we can see the movement inside. The movement is pretty basic looking. It's very machined looking. It looks quite mass production. It doesn't have that same luxury feel that something like a Patek or one of my Piguet has, which is understandable because obviously it's a completely different price point, but it really does look very machined, like a complete production line. It doesn't look like anyone's tried to finish it by hand, unlike those higher end watches. It's polished all over, so it goes with that whole dress look, because it basically is a dress watch, despite the huge size and the sports features. And now if we look at the pushers and the crown is a little bit difficult to use because the edges aren't ridged enough that it grabs onto you. They're slightly smoothed out, and it's because of those pushers as well, and the fact it's very close to the case, it's quite difficult to wind sometimes. The pushers are okay. They do feel a little cheap when you press them, especially the start-stop button. You barely have to push it in before it's already clicked. The reset button definitely feels more solid, but the start-stop doesn't have the same quality that some other brands have. The actual features of the watch, or the complications of the watch, is a 2 time zone, so we've got a GMT, and we've also got a chronograph as well. And we've got a date wheel and then obviously time, and then small seconds. So there's a few things going on the dial, and let's break that down now. So we'll start at 12 o'clock. So at 12 o'clock, we've got our 24-hour sub-dial, and that shows our 24 hours for our second time zone. That's quite nice because it kind of shows the night and day part of the dial, a bit like a Rolex GMT BLNR. And it's set on this world map, which is really nice. I think it's kind of got that whole travel style to it. It reminds me a little bit of an IWC in a way. Then if we come on to the actual dial itself, the dial surface, we've got this wavy pattern that looks really interesting. It's called their exploding star pattern. It looks amazing in certain light, really catches the light in an interesting way and adds some real depth to the watch. But if you don't have any light on this watch, it does appear extremely flat. If you've got a huge watch like this and the dial really does go edge to edge, it really is a 43mm diameter dial, which is huge. You want to have some sort of depth and presence and pop, otherwise it just looks like a huge pancake on your wrist. We've got a little sunken date wheel at 6 o'clock. There's something that I find a little bit annoying about this date wheel, and that is to adjust it, you don't have one position on the crown that you just twist through. You actually have to move through your hours of the day that way, which is much longer to do. It's a bit more difficult to adjust. So for me, that's not so useful. So just above that date window, we have our small seconds. But right at the perimeter of the dial, we've got the far top edge, we've got our seconds, and then inside that, we've got our minutes. So that's because, which I'll come on to, is a slightly different chronograph to like a Daytona. And then further in towards the dial, we've got indexes, which are red gold or rose gold plated steel. So that's a little bit disappointing for me. I quite like something that's real gold rather than plated. I think that's just not quite high end or luxury. There's no real reason why they aren't proper gold, other than just cutting costs. At £6,000, I don't think this watch is cheap. I don't think it really should have plated hands. I think, especially if this is one of the higher end 4, 8, 10 watches, I think they should really have put solid gold hands and index markers. When the chronograph is off, we have at 12 o'clock our dark blue hand, which is our seconds hand, our chronograph seconds, and then behind that hidden is our red gold plated steel hand, which is our minutes, our chronograph minutes hand. So that's slightly different to a Daytona in the fact that we don't have sub-dials for chronograph hours and chronograph minutes. We only have a chronograph minutes and chronograph seconds hand, but they basically cycle round the dial full size, which is quite an interesting looking piece if you do want to use it for a chronograph. I actually find that a little bit easier to read than maybe a Daytona chronograph. And this chronograph is also a flyback chronograph like we see on the 5980 from Patek, meaning that as the chronograph is running, you can reset it from the little pusher at 4 o'clock without having to stop it first. That name Twinfly comes from our twin time zones and the flyback chronograph. Then underneath those chronograph hands, we've got our home, hour and minutes hands for our current home time, or wherever we are in the world, that's our present time. And then underneath those two hands, we've got our blue cutouts of arrow looking hour hand for our second time zone. And that matches up with our 24-hour dial that we spoke about earlier at 12 o'clock. The GMT feature is very, very useful for someone who travels a lot or has phone calls regularly with someone in another part of the world. So let's say you're based in London and you need to make a phone call to someone in Los Angeles, which is 8 hours behind London. You'd be able to check your watch or have it always set to 8 hours behind if you always call to them. You have a little quick glance at your watch and be able to see what the time is in Los Angeles, either via the 12 o'clock dial or your blue second time zone hand. So overall, the watch is nice. It's got that luxury feel to it, but not to the same level another watch company has or other watch companies have, like Omega or Tag, who are on a similar level price-wise. Is no comparison to this on a Rolex or an Audemars Piguet or a Patek. Obviously, completely different price point, but the quality is just definitely not here with these watches. There are a few frustrating features like that date, having to cycle through the dates, which is just a little bit irritating. And also the fact the crown is just a little too slippy to grab onto. The cheap feeling chronograph and the gold plated hands and a few other bits and bobs like the finished movement inside and the clasp, it just doesn't feel quite that high end. And to be honest, probably not worth £6,000. I understand it's a limited edition watch and it has got several complications on, so if it was from another brand, it would be very much more expensive. But for me, I'd rather put my money elsewhere. But having said that, if I was to look at Montblanc, I wouldn't necessarily look at this one. I'd actually look at one of the older style chronograph watches from Montblanc, from the early 2000s. I think those are really cool, unique looking watches. And you can pick those up for like £1,500 to £2,000 now. I think they're much more interesting looking than this piece. They're also 38mm, which is something I much prefer, a smaller watch. And I think that suits this style of watch much better with that dress look. I don't really like huge looking dress watches. I just don't think it really fits with the whole idea of what a dress watch is meant to be. Would I own this watch? Probably not. As I mentioned, I'd probably go back in time to sort of their early 2000s style chronograph watches. Because of the slightly cheap feel to it and the slightly expensive price tag for what it is, I would rather go back and look at something else or start at a Rolex and look at a base model Rolex, because this won't go up in value as much as the Rolex will, because there isn't as many people interested in this watch as there would be a base model Rolex. For some people, this would be an absolutely brilliant watch to have, especially people who travel for business a lot, who need to have quite a smart looking watch for business meetings every now and again. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know what you think about this Montblanc or some other Montblancs. Maybe you want me to review another Montblanc or another watch. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. Stay tuned for more watch reviews.